The Pomodoro method gets a ton of hype and it is pretty amazing when it works, but a lot of times it doesn't work, which is frustrating. And I think there are four reasons why it doesn't always work. And this is my theory, but I'm also going to test this theory. So the four reasons that I have identified are that you can't get started. If you never start your Pomodoro timer, then of course you're not going to get much done. The second is that you can't stay focused once you start. The third is that you can't get back to work after you're taking your breaks, whether that's the short breaks or the long breaks. And the final one, why the Pomodoro method might not work for you, is if you just can't get enough done. Maybe you are sticking with the schedule, but you find that you're not super productive, even though you're trying to have these focused blocks of time. And so I want to do more than theorize, because I made a video like this a while ago with these theories and it did better than a lot of the videos on my channel, but I thought, why not actually test it out? So that's coming soon. But first, I'm going to go over some of the solutions that I think you can use to solve each of these problems before I put it to the test. So for the first problem, you can't get started. One big thing that has helped me, and I've used the Pomodoro method quite a lot, is to have a good app and a consistent way of starting it. If I have to decide every time, am I going to start my stove timer or a timer on my phone, or am I going to use one of the Pomodoro apps on my phone or my computer, then it doesn't work very well, because just that little bit of friction with making the decision causes me to not start or to waste time scrolling through new Pomodoro apps that I haven't tried, which I've done way too much of. I definitely don't have to try a new Pomodoro app every single week. So I'm going to pick one app and stick with it when I do my challenge. Maybe that's something you want to try out. If you try to use the Pomodoro method and it doesn't work super well, just make sure that you always have a consistent way that's quick to start. I think that's the key thing. Whatever is most quick for you to start, the least amount of friction is the best. Another thing with getting started is to know what you're going to use your Pomodoro session for. This might seem kind of obvious, but make sure you're specific enough. That's something I've noticed for myself. If I don't know exactly what I'm spending that session on, I'm much less likely to get started. And even if I do start the timer, sometimes I still get distracted because I'm not super specific about the very next step I'm going to take once I start the session. So one strategy I try to use is to actually open the correct tabs, turn on my music, get everything set up so that I can start on the very first step of my project right when I hit the timer, and that kind of creates less friction too. Another reason is that maybe your sessions are too long. And I know that sounds like it has nothing to do with being able to get started, but my hypothesis is that if the sessions are too long, it's also intimidating. It feels like you have to commit to this really long session and maybe you don't feel like focusing that long or you have a headache, but the shorter the session, the more likely you will be to be able to push off whatever excuse you have, whether it's because you're hungry or you just don't feel like it, you don't have the energy, you have a headache, whatever it is. If it's a shorter session, you'll have less reasons to give into that excuse and it will be less intimidating. So I think that maybe shorter sessions are the solution to when you just can't get started. And this final one kind of applies to any time you can't start something. It's often because the reward doesn't feel big enough. Every time we make any action, whether it's going through the drive-thru to get some French fries, it's because we are anticipating the reward. We take actions in life so that we can get the reward. And if the reward feels too far off or unattainable, then we're less likely to take the action. And Andrew Huberman, you've probably heard of him, he's a pretty famous neuroscientist. He talks about how important it is for your rewards to be inherent. The idea is to make them really specific to the task and not like, I'm gonna have ice cream if I study, but I'm going to feel more prepared for my test if I study. Or instead of I'm gonna get Chipotle if I clean my house, it's I'm gonna feel really relaxed and enjoy the clean house if I clean my house. And that's one thing I'm really gonna put to the test when I do this experiment, because I think that's something that I've known in theory for a really long time, but I hardly ever put it into practice. I hardly ever take the time to really internalize the reason that I'm doing the thing or imagine the future inherent reward of having the thing done. I just do things because I should do them and I should get through my to-do list. So I'm really excited to be intentional about that and put that to the test when I do my experiment, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. Okay, on to number 2. This issue is if you get started, you're able to motivate yourself to start that Pomodoro timer, but you don't actually stay focused all the way through the session. This is probably the hardest part for me. A lot of times I start a Pomodoro and I forget that the session's going before it ends and I get distracted, and then an hour later I remember that I set a Pomodoro timer and completely ignored it. And so I found a couple solutions that work pretty well, but again, I'm gonna put them to the test. So some of them are visual, just so that you don't forget that you're in the session. I think there's 2 pieces to this problem. There's the piece of forgetting that you're in a session, which maybe sounds kind of pathetic, but it happens to me all the time, so I'm guessing it might happen to you. Or not forgetting really that you're in the session, but succumbing to a distraction, or maybe you succumb to a distraction because your phone buzzes. So maybe in the moment you kind of forget for a second, but you remember right away, but you kind of still decide to give in to that distraction. So there's like giving in versus forgetting entirely. So if you want to not forget entirely, it seems to me that the best way to do it is to have some visual or audible reminders that you're in the session. So things like a ticking noise or certain music. I think a ticking noise is even better because it's going to be specific to that session. Maybe you're listening to music other times, you're listening to music during your break. But if you have a ticking timer noise going, hopefully that reminds you that you're in a session. The second one is a visual reminder. There's a lot of cool visual timers that I've seen. Maybe I'll put some on screen or linked in the description. I haven't tried them yet, although maybe I'll order one on Amazon for this test to see if it works, or just having a timer on screen. Sometimes I'll be using my desktop computer for a project, and then I will put like a Pomodoro app and a big timer, make it full screen on my laptop or even an iPad so that it's right there, and that visual reminder really helps me to not forget that I'm in a Pomodoro session. Okay, now a few for if you're just trying to not succumb to the distractions. So if you really, really want to maybe look something up, or you think of another task that you should be doing, try your best to get in the habit of just writing it down. I usually keep paper on my desk when I'm in a Pomodoro session so that I can write down the things that I want to do after the session, the things I have an urge to do. Ideally, I would get to a point where I don't distract myself and waste the time of writing those things down. But to be honest, with where I'm at right now with my discipline, and I guess, I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but that feeling of, oh no, I'm gonna forget this. I should do this now. The only way for me right now to get past that is to write it on a piece of paper. And I think it works pretty well to get me focused again. And maybe eventually I'll just be in the habit of focusing and those ideas won't even pop into my mind. But as long as they are popping up and I feel a little bit of resistance to ignoring them, I'm just gonna write them down on a piece of paper, and at least I'm not actually texting that person back or researching that thing. I'm waiting, and then I'm returning my focus to my task. Another thing, if you're completely exhausted, another thing that Huberman recommends is to like just stare at the wall or stare at the window for 10 seconds. He actually recommends staring at one very specific focal point. So that's one thing you could do, or you could just give your mind a rest, but don't actually do another activity. And this is something I want to get better about, because usually when it's hard for me to focus, I just try harder to focus. But I think it'd be really cool to experiment more with like letting myself do nothing for a second, or 10 seconds or 15 seconds or 30 seconds, and then return to my task, rather than it being like this high pressure, I have to stay super focused and I can't stop typing, versus doing something totally distracting. So I'm going to try that, and I will let you know how it goes, because honestly, I have not experimented with that one very much, but I want to. And then I probably should have led with this one because I think it's the most important part, but remove distractions. Move your phone away. Again, something I often don't do, but I'm going to try to do it better. Move your phone far away so that maybe you still hear it ring if you don't want to miss a phone call, but you're much less likely to reach for it. You can use apps like Freedom is one that I use, where it's a website blocker. Okay, so the third category of reasons why the Pomodoro method might not be working is that you can't get back to work after your break. So that might be the short 5-minute breaks or the longer breaks. Either way, if you can't stick to the schedule, it's frustrating. So I think a big reason for this is when the breaks are too short. So you're putting in all this focused time, but then maybe you want a glass of water and you have to use the bathroom. And if you don't have time to do those things that really feel kind of essential before the next work session starts, then you're gonna fudge it. You're gonna go over your break time. And if you ignore the designated break time too many times, you're gonna start ignoring it completely. So maybe the first time you're like, okay, well, that was a 6-minute break, whatever, not a big deal. But if you don't take it seriously, at least for me, then eventually I stop taking it seriously at all and I kind of ignore it completely. So I have to have some boundaries around that. So I might want to extend the break time longer than 5 minutes. I'm not really sure with my challenge if it's going to be more of an issue of the long breaks not being long enough, or if it's going to be an issue of the short breaks not being long enough. In the past, it seems like the short breaks aren't long enough, but maybe I'm just not hard enough on myself. So we're going to find out. But if that's an issue for you, then consider making your break times longer, but just being really, really strict with yourself that you actually stick to the amount of break time that you pre-decided. Okay, other reasons, aside from your breaks being too short, is that they're too fun. I know it feels like it's not the end of the world to just have a fun break. I've tried it so many times. I think I can do the fun thing or the bad thing, the checking social media or playing a game on my phone and still get back to work. But if I'm honest with myself, it's so much harder than if I just take a break. And I know that more screen time is not going to make it easier for me to focus when I get back to an actual Pomodoro session, but I ignore it anyways. So I don't know, maybe the trick is to be strict with yourself on those short breaks, but then kind of let yourself do whatever you want on the longer breaks. It's probably different for everybody, but I really want to practice doing better on that and having these boring breaks where I just stare at a wall or maybe meditate, which I hate to even say that because it sounds so boring, or go for a walk or things like that that I know are good for me and not going to be as hard to pull myself away from as a fun break like playing a game. And then the last one is if you're not stopping at the timer. This is another problem if your timer's not loud enough or maybe you decide to keep working through it, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I get that you don't want to be distracted if you're like in a flow state and everything's going great and you're getting a lot done and you want to finish something up and the timer goes off, maybe you want to ignore it. But if the break thing isn't working for you and you're not able to stick to the schedule, then it might be a problem of your sessions being too long, because the longer your sessions are, the more likely the break isn't going to feel long enough. For example, if you plan to do a 25-minute session, but that turns into a 45-minute session, then a 5-minute break is probably not going to feel long enough, especially if you're used to doing 25-5, 25-5. So I'm going to try to be really strict with myself to actually stop the session as soon as the timer goes off, or maybe within 30 seconds to a minute. Maybe I'll give myself a little cushion, but then actually stop the session so that I can actually take the break and stay on schedule and not make excuses of, well, I did a longer session, so I get a longer break, and then it all just gets muddy and falls apart. Again, I'm not saying that these are like hard, fast rules and that these are for sure the solutions to the problems. These are my theories. These are the things that seem to work for me in the casual way that I've done the Pomodoro method in the past, but that's part of why I really want to test them. And in a second, I'm going to go into the fourth category, but first I'm going to tell you what the experiment idea is. And it's pretty crazy, and I kind of don't want to say it because then I have to stick to it. But what I'm going to try to do is 25 Pomodoro sessions in one day, which, if you think about it, is kind of insane. That's 625 minutes or over 10 hours, almost 10 and a half hours of focus work in a day. Honestly, I know that's not possible. Like, it is proven that people cannot focus for pretty much over 3 or 4 steady hours in a day, let alone 10. But I really want to try this challenge, and my idea is that it's not going to go perfectly, so I'll kind of see where it falls apart. And also, I will mix it up. So I'll have some of that time be really focused work on hard projects that actually require a lot of focus. And then some of it will be focused, but it might be something like cleaning or running an errand. So I will be focused on what I have decided to do. Maybe it's even texting friends back or something as simple as like, I should do this thing, but it's technically not work, but I've been procrastinating on it. But 10 hours of like intentional work. And again, it's not going to go perfectly, but I'm really curious to see how much I can get done in a day if I try to do 25 sessions. For reference, usually I consider it a good day if I can get 6 Pomodoro sessions done. I've read a lot of people on Reddit try to aim for like 8 to 10, and these people feel like they've kind of mastered it. And I mean, they have. I think that's pretty darn good. If you're able to do 8 to 10 25-minute sessions, that's awesome. And if I ever get 8 or even 10 done in a day, I'm really proud of myself and I feel pretty burnt out. So 25 is just ridiculous, but we're just going to see what happens because I want to do crazy challenges on this channel. And so I think that's a good way to start. And so with factoring in time for breaks, this is going to take at least 12 hours, probably more, maybe like 15. I don't know. I haven't added it up. So I'm going to have to start really early and probably end really late. It's going to take my entire Saturday, but I'm going to do it and just see what happens. And as I do it, I'm going to test out all of my theories because again, they're theories and some of them I've noticed they work, but I want to see how much they really hold up and what better way to test it than this. And even if the experiment doesn't go perfect, which it's definitely not going to, I think if I can even get close to 25 sessions, then I'll definitely have hopefully perfected the Pomodoro method, at least for myself. And then when I do 8 sessions in a day, it'll probably feel totally manageable and I'll have some pretty good strategies figured out. Okay, the fourth reason is that you can't get enough done. And I think there's 2 sides of this coin and it's probably different depending on your personality and maybe the project you're working on. But the 2 issues I think are either you're frustrated that you're interrupted, you want to work past the timer, but then you feel kind of restricted by it, or maybe it takes you a long time to get into a focused state. You feel like you just barely got focused by the time the timer goes off. That's really frustrating. If that's the case, you might need to do longer sessions and maybe longer breaks as well. Or maybe the Pomodoro method just isn't right for you, but I feel like that should be a last resort because I really do hope that the Pomodoro method can work for most people if you just figure out how to adapt it to your work style and your lifestyle. The other reason is if you kind of naturally let yourself off the hook if a timer's going. It's almost like when people work a job, hourly pay, what do they call it? Like clock punchers? Is that the term? I don't remember the term. But where you're just putting in the time. And so if you don't have the drive to work hard, if you just think, I'm just gonna set the timer and then I'm not gonna focus well because all I have to do is the time, then maybe you need to also attach an output goal. So you need to say, I'm gonna only put in 25 minutes, but I also am gonna try really hard to get this many words written or this much of my kitchen clean, whatever your goal is, to also attach an output. Maybe it's even just a goal, maybe you're not hard on yourself if you're not able to get it done. But then that motivates you more than just like waiting for the clock to be done and wasting time. I'm so excited to do that challenge. So watch it here next. And I'm pretty scared of whatever's going to happen here because I haven't filmed it yet. So wish me luck and tune in to see my suffering. Bye.